The distant sound of coyotes echoed across the barren plains as Rachel Zimmer clutched her empty tin plate, watching her 5-year-old daughter Lily fall asleep with a hollow stomach for the third night in a row. The drought of 1875 had not been kind to the Kansas territory, especially to a widow with no means beyond the failing homestead her husband had built before typhoid took him 6 months ago. Rachel brushed a strand of auburn hair from her face, tucking it behind her ear as she peered into her nearly bare cupboard. All that remained was a single piece of bread, hardened from age but still edible. She had been saving it for tomorrow's breakfast, but Lily's whimpering in her sleep broke her heart. Carefully, she wrapped the bread in a cloth and placed it beside her daughter's small bed for when she woke. The morning sun crept through the cracks of the wooden shutters, painting strips of light across the dirt floor. Rachel had been up since before dawn, trying to coax some life from the withered vegetables in her garden. The creek that ran near their property had shrunk to little more than a trickle, barely enough to sustain them, let alone their crops. Lily emerged from the bedroom, her honey-colored hair tangled from sleep, clutching the piece of bread. "Mama, did you eat?" she asked, her eyes wide with concern beyond her years. Rachel forced a smile. "Yes, darling, I ate earlier." The lie felt bitter on her tongue, but she couldn't bear to take food from her child's mouth. "I want to share," Lily insisted, breaking the bread in two and extending the larger piece toward her mother. Before Rachel could respond, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Visitors were rare on this remote stretch of land. Rachel approached cautiously, grabbing the shotgun that leaned against the wall, a precaution her husband had insisted upon before he died. "Who's there?" she called, her voice steadier than she felt. "Name's Vaughn Norris, madam. My horse threw a shoe about a mile back. Was hoping I might trouble you for some water." Rachel cracked open the door, keeping the shotgun visible. A tall man stood before her, hat in hand, dust covering his clothes from the trail. His face was tanned from the sun, a short beard covering his jaw, and his eyes a striking blue that reminded her of the sky after a storm looked tired but kind. "We don't have much water to spare, Mr. Norris," Rachel said, her grip on the shotgun loosening slightly. "The creek's nearly dry." Vaughn nodded, understanding etched in the lines around his eyes. "I understand, madam. Been a hard season all through these parts." His gaze shifted to Lily, who peered around her mother's skirts, still holding her broken piece of bread. A soft expression crossed his weathered face. Rachel sighed. She couldn't turn away a traveler in need, no matter how scarce their resources. "We have enough for your horse, I suppose, and you're welcome to rest in the shade while I fetch it." "Much obliged," Vaughn said, replacing his hat. "And if you don't mind, I'm handy with tools." "Noticed your pump handle's looking worn. Could take a look while I'm here." Rachel hesitated. Pride told her to refuse, but practicality won out. The pump had been giving her trouble for weeks. "That would be kind, thank you." As Rachel collected water for his horse, Vaughn knelt beside the pump, examining the mechanism with skilled hands. Lily watched him curiously, still clutching her bread. "Is that your breakfast, little lady?" Vaughn asked gently. Lily nodded. "Mama and I are sharing." She held up her portion proudly. Rachel returned with the bucket, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. Vaughn said nothing, but understanding passed between them, the kind that needed no words. "The pump just needs a new leather gasket," he said, standing up. "I have one in my saddlebag. Would save you trouble in the long run." "We couldn't accept," Rachel began. "Please, madam, it's no burden." His eyes met hers, and something in them silenced her protest. "Besides, I've been riding too long without proper company. A chance to be useful would do me good." As he worked, Vaughn told stories that made Lily laugh, tales of cattle drives and far-off places that sparked her imagination. Rachel found herself smiling despite herself, realizing how long it had been since laughter had filled their small home. When noon approached, Lily offered Vaughn her piece of bread. Rachel moved to stop her, but the sincerity in her daughter's gesture gave her pause. "That's mighty generous," Vaughn said, looking from Lily to Rachel, but I have something better to share." From his saddlebag, he produced jerky, dried apples, and a small sack of cornmeal. "Been hunting along the way, more than I can eat before it spoils." That night, for the first time in weeks, they ate a proper meal. Vaughn insisted on cooking, producing a hearty stew from his provisions and the few vegetables Rachel had managed to salvage. The taste of real food brought tears to her eyes, though she hid them by busying herself with Lily's hair. "Where are you headed, Mr. Norris?" Rachel asked as they sat on the porch after dinner, Lily having been tucked into bed. "Nowhere in particular," he replied, rolling a cigarette between his fingers. "Been working cattle drives between Texas and Kansas for years. Thought maybe it was time to find something more permanent." "And what would that be?" she asked, curious despite herself. Vaughn struck a match, the brief flare illuminating his face in the gathering darkness. "Don't rightly know yet, madam, but I reckon I'll know it when I see it." Rachel nodded, understanding the feeling of uncertainty all too well. "My husband had plans for this place," she said softly. "Wanted to grow it into something that would provide for Lily's future. Now I'm just trying to hold on to it long enough to figure out what comes next." Vaughn was silent for a moment, looking out at the darkened plains. "Sometimes life takes unexpected turns," he finally said. "Lost my parents young, spent my youth drifting. Found purpose with the cattle outfits, but never felt like I belonged anywhere." The honesty in his voice resonated with Rachel. Her husband had been a good man, but rarely shared his thoughts this way. There was something about Vaughn's quiet strength that made her feel safer than she had in months. When morning came, Rachel expected Vaughn to continue on his way, but he hesitated before gathering his things. "Mrs. Zimmer, I couldn't help noticing your well needs deepening. Creek won't sustain you through summer at this rate." He shifted his weight, hat in hand. "If you'd allow it, I could stay a few days. Help dig it out proper." Rachel wanted to refuse accepting charity went against everything she believed in, but Lily's future depended on this homestead surviving. "I can pay you with meals," she offered, finding middle ground between pride and necessity, "and a place to sleep in the barn." Vaughn agreed readily, and what was meant to be a few days stretched into a week, then two. Each morning, Rachel woke to find him already at work fixing the roof, mending fences, or coaxing life from the garden with irrigation techniques he'd learned in drier territories. Lily blossomed under his attention. He carved her a wooden horse, taught her to recognize animal tracks, and carried her on his shoulders when her small legs grew tired. Rachel found herself watching them together, a curious ache in her chest that was both sweet and painful. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, talking long after Lily had gone to bed. Vaughn spoke of the lands he'd seen, the people he'd met. Rachel shared stories of her life before growing up in Ohio, meeting her husband, their journey west with dreams bigger than their experience. "Why did you really stop here?" she asked him one evening, 3 weeks after his arrival. "There must be dozens of homesteads between here and Dodge City with better prospects." Vaughn was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. "I've seen a lot of suffering in my travels," he finally said, "but not often such dignity in it." He looked at her directly. "When your daughter offered me her last bit of bread, I could see you'd gone without to give her something in me couldn't just ride away." Rachel felt heat rise to her cheeks, unsure how to respond to such honesty. "I should turn in," she said softly, rising from her chair. "Early start tomorrow." Vaughn nodded, respecting her retreat. "Good night, Mrs. Zimmer." "Rachel," she corrected him. "I think after all this time you can call me Rachel." A slow smile spread across his face. "Good night, Rachel." That night, sleep eluded her. Rachel stared at the ceiling, thinking about how Vaughn's presence had changed everything. The homestead was starting to thrive again. Lily was happier than she'd been since her father died. And Rachel herself felt something awakening that she'd thought buried alongside her husband: hope, possibility, perhaps even desire. The following week brought news of a cattle drive passing nearby. Vaughn explained that they would need extra hands for the final push to the railhead, offering good pay for a few weeks' work. I could earn enough to buy proper supplies for winter, he told Rachel as they harvested the vegetables his irrigation had saved. Maybe even a milk cow for Lily. Rachel felt her heart sink, though she nodded with forced enthusiasm. You should go, you've done more than enough here already. Vaughn studied her face. I'd come back, he said quietly, if you'd want me to. The question hung between them, loaded with meaning beyond the simple words. This isn't your burden, Rachel replied, avoiding his gaze. You have your own life to lead. And if I wanted my life to lead here? The directness of his question startled her into meeting his eyes. Vaughn, a shout from Lily interrupted them. She came running from the direction of the creek, excitement evident in her bouncing curls. Mama, Mr. Vaughn, come see what I found. The moment broken, they followed Lily to discover she'd found a turtle making its slow way across their property. The serious conversation was set aside, but Rachel felt its weight throughout the day, through dinner, and into the evening as she put Lily to bed. When she stepped onto the porch, Vaughn was waiting, his expression thoughtful. I've been thinking, he said before she could speak. About why I've stayed these weeks. Rachel leaned against the doorframe, heart quickening. And started as wanting to help, then became something more. He moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gray in his beard, the tiny scar above his eyebrow. Rachel, I know it hasn't been long since you lost your husband. I know there's Lily to consider, but I've never felt so, right, as I do here with you both. Rachel closed her eyes briefly. It's been lonely, she admitted. So lonely I sometimes wonder if I can bear it. But I don't want your pity. Pity, Vaughn's voice held surprise. Is that what you think this is? He reached out, hesitated, then gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a mirror of the gesture she so often used with Lily. Rachel, I've crossed 5 states and 2 territories. Worked more ranches than I can count, never once found a place that called to me to stay. His eyes, sincere and steady, held hers. Until now. The cattle drive left without Vaughn Norris. Instead, he rode into town and returned with supplies, seeds for fall planting, and official papers filed at the land office to register as a homesteader on the adjacent unclaimed parcel, connecting his future to the land beside Rachel's. Through the autumn, they established a rhythm. Vaughn built a small cabin on his claim to satisfy homestead laws, though he took most meals with Rachel and Lily. They worked side by side during the days, preparing for winter, and in the evenings, they planned for spring, what to plant, how to expand, whether to invest in cattle or stay with crops. The first snow came early that year. Rachel woke to find the world transformed into endless white, Lily's excited squeals drawing her to the window. Across the yard, she could see smoke rising from Vaughn's cabin chimney, and the sight brought unexpected comfort. Later that day, as Lily napped exhausted from play in the snow, Rachel found Vaughn in the barn, repairing harnesses by lamplight. You've changed everything, she said from the doorway, surprising both him and herself with the sudden declaration. Vaughn set aside his work, giving her his full attention. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lose everything, Rachel continued, moving into the warmth of the barn. The land, our home, maybe even Lily if I couldn't provide for her. You're stronger than you know, Vaughn replied. You'd have found a way, Rachel shook her head. Maybe, but now I don't just want to survive, I want to live again. She took a deep breath. Because of you. The space between them seemed to shrink, though neither had moved. Vaughn stood slowly, his eyes never leaving hers. Rachel, he said, her name almost a prayer on his lips. I need you to be certain, because if you take one more step toward me, I don't think I'll have the strength to be a gentleman about it any longer. The warning only made her more certain. Rachel closed the distance between them, and Vaughn's arms enveloped her, his mouth finding hers with a hunger that matched her own awakening desire. They married as winter gave way to spring, a simple ceremony in the small church in town with Lily as their only attendant, proudly scattering wildflower petals before her mother. The community, initially skeptical of the drifting cowboy who'd settled among them, had gradually accepted Vaughn as one of their own, particularly after he organized a barn raising for the Joneses when lightning struck their property. And again, when he helped deliver the Millers twins during a blizzard when the doctor couldn't reach them in time. Their first year together brought challenges. A late frost threatened the crops. Wolves took 2 of their chickens. Rachel discovered she was expecting a child, bringing both joy and worry about the coming winter. But through it all, Vaughn's steady presence never wavered. "Did you ever think," Rachel asked him one evening as they sat on the porch, her head resting on his shoulder, her belly just beginning to round with their child, "that one piece of bread would lead to all of this?" Vaughn's hand covered hers, his thumb stroking her palm. "It wasn't the bread that changed things," he said thoughtfully. "It was that you gave it away when you had nothing else to give." Lily burst from the house, interrupting them with news that the stew was bubbling over, and they laughed, rising together to attend to dinner, a family forged from hardship and kindness, stronger for having found each other. As seasons turned into years, the Norris homestead flourished. Vaughn's knowledge of cattle eventually led them to raise a small but profitable herd. Rachel's garden expanded into proper fields, their produce known at the local market for its quality. Lily grew tall and confident, her father's memory honored but her heart full of love for the man who had chosen to be her second father. The baby, a son they named James, was joined 2 years later by twin girls, Sophia and Alina. Their home expanded as their family did, with Vaughn adding rooms and eventually building a new, larger house that Rachel had secretly dreamed of but never dared hope for. In the spring of 1882, 7 years after Vaughn had first arrived at their door, they hosted a gathering for neighbors and friends to celebrate the completion of the new house. As twilight descended, Rachel found Vaughn standing alone by the old pump, the first thing he had fixed on that fateful day. "Remembering?" she asked, sliding her arm through his. "Thinking how close I came to riding past," he admitted. "Was nearly out of sight of your chimney smoke when my horse threw that shoe." Rachel leaned against him, watching their children play with the neighbors' kids in the yard. "I've never believed that was an accident," she said softly. "Nor have I." Vaughn pressed his lips to her temple. "Best mishap of my life." From the house came the sounds of laughter and conversation, the community that had embraced them sharing in their prosperity and happiness. Their oldest son, James, now 6, ran up to them, his face serious. "Papa, Mr. Benson says you used to be a real cowboy, that you could rope a steer while riding at full gallop," Vaughn chuckled. "Well now, that might be stretching the truth a bit, but I could handle myself all right." "Will you teach me?" James asked, his eyes wide with admiration. "When you're a bit older," Vaughn promised. "For now, how about I teach you to whittle instead, safer for all concerned?" James nodded solemnly before running back to join the other children. Rachel squeezed Vaughn's arm, grateful for his patience with their curious, energetic son. "Sometimes I wonder what Thomas would think," Rachel said quietly, referring to her first husband. "About all of this, about you." Vaughn considered this carefully, as he did all important matters. "I think," he finally replied, "he'd be glad you found happiness again, that his daughter is growing up strong and loved, that his dream for this land came true, even if not exactly as he planned." Rachel nodded, knowing he was right. There had been a time when she felt guilt for loving again, but that had faded as she realized loving Vaughn didn't diminish what she had shared with Thomas. It was possible to honor the past while embracing the future. "We should get back to our guests," she said, though she made no move to leave the peaceful moment. "In a minute," Vaughn replied, turning to face her fully. "First, I need to tell you something important." Rachel raised an eyebrow, curious at his sudden seriousness. "7 years ago, you gave away your last piece of bread," he said, taking her hands in his. "And every day since, I've tried to be worthy of that kind of selflessness." His voice grew husky with emotion. "I love you, Rachel Norris, more today than yesterday, and not as much as I will tomorrow." Tears sprang to Rachel's eyes at the simple, heartfelt declaration. After all these years, his words still had the power to move her deeply. "I love you too," she whispered, reaching up to touch his face. "My wandering cowboy who found his home." Their lips met in a tender kiss, the moment broken only by the sound of their children calling for them. Hand in hand, they walked back toward the house, toward the life they had built together from nothing but faith, hard work, and an act of kindness that had changed everything. As the stars appeared one by one in the vast Kansas sky, Rachel thought about how a single moment offering that last piece of bread to a stranger had altered the course of her life. She had given away so little, yet gained everything. And Vaughn, who had only sought water for his horse, had instead found the family and purpose he'd spent his life searching for. Some would call it chance, others fate. But Rachel preferred to think of it as the natural outcome of two good hearts recognizing each other across the divide of circumstance. A recognition that had grown into a love strong enough to sustain them through whatever challenges the frontier might yet bring. And in the years that followed, when their children would ask how their parents met, Vaughn would always begin the story the same way. "Your mother gave me her last piece of bread, so I gave her my whole life in return." And Rachel would smile, knowing it was the simplest truth of their enduring love.